If you're a real estate agent, particularly on the residential side, you're going to love this because you're literally going to find ways to refer business to commercial agents such as me and Rich in Arizona and collect referral fees. So it's happening all around you. So wouldn't you like to know how to do it?
Welcome to the Jeff Sutherlin Show. Let's grow today as we learn from decades of real estate and leadership experience.
We want you to know that when you log into this show, you're going to get authentic conversation. We're going to give it to you straight, and it's going to be real.
Hey everybody, Rich Galster and Jeff Sutherlin here. Today we're going to be talking about commercial leasing. If you're a consumer, you want to listen to this episode because we're going to teach you what commercial leasing is all about. And if you're a real estate agent, particularly on the residential side, you're going to love this because you're literally going to find ways to refer business to commercial agents such as me and Rich in Arizona and collect referral fees. So it's happening all around you. So wouldn't you like to know how to do it? So Rich, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Jeff. How you doing, man?
Fantastic. Let's talk about what a commercial lease is, Rich. Let's talk a little bit about what that is and and maybe how it differs from a residential lease.
Yeah, I mean, commercial leases obviously vary quite a bit from residential. I think the commercial leases, just thinking about what that relates to, commercial properties being office, industrial, retail for the most part. And kind of the main differences between residential and commercial, I think one of the big ones is the lease term. You find that in commercial leases, they tend to run quite a bit longer, anywhere from 3 to 10 years is probably the most common. We do a lot of leases in that 3 to 5 year range, but occasionally you'll see some 10-year leases. The level of complexity, another big one. I think the commercial leases just involve a lot more details, regarding usage and maintenance responsibilities, things like that. A financial responsibility, kind of the same. Tenants in commercial leases tend to bear more of the cost than you see in residential leases. So a lot of people don't realize, especially in retail leases, um, the tenant is responsible in many cases for the AC unit on the roof, things like that, which can be a pretty substantial cost, right? So just things like that to be aware of. And then, constraints and uses is another key one. In many cases, what the tenant can do in that property is going to be restricted, might be based on zoning, might be based on landlord, what the landlord wants in the space. So you'll see, we had a lease recently, right, where we had an issue with the tenant was really looking for kind of an exclusive so that another similar business couldn't be in that center. And we had to kind of fight for that on their behalf to get it. So I guess that's a few of the differences anyway.
Yeah, that happens often, doesn't it? Where if we're putting somebody as a leasee, and that would be the tenant and a property, and they want to have a certain utility, they want to use that for a certain thing that they do in their business. And there might be somebody else in that strip center or that mall that's doing the same thing. That landlord that has that entire building can be very picky and they can exclude somebody, especially if they have somebody that's already doing that business, right? So there's a lot of factors involved. And then there's also certain businesses that landlords just simply don't want in that building.
Yeah, I think especially in the bigger retail centers or shopping centers, it tends to be a lot more common.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the common lease components? Like on the residential side, we have a lot of the same things we have when we buy a house and in the residential side. The leasee can look at the home, they can do some due diligence, but typically when you lease a property on the residential side, the landlord's going to take care of a lot of those expenses, such as the AC unit, the roof. The tenant would take care of typically utilities. That's pretty common on the residential side. But on the commercial side, the difference being that there's so many different lease types, and that's very different from residential. Residential has pretty much one way that we do leasing. There's usually, the tenant gives a security deposit. They pay a base. They pay a rental amount every month. They pay the utilities. They pay the electricity. They pay the internet. That's typical with what happens. And if there's a problem with the house, the landlord will cover it. But when we have like a lease on the commercial side, Rich, maybe talk a little bit about the basic components of that lease, and then maybe we can jump into the different types of lease types on commercial.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the basic components of a commercial lease, and some of these we've touched on a little bit. Some of them are similar to what you see on residential. Obviously, you have a lease term is always outlined in the lease itself. And again, that might be 3 years, it might be 10 years, it might be potentially even longer than that. The rent amount, of course, which is usually set with like a base rental amount, and then you might have a triple net component added to that, which, we can talk a little bit more about that as well. Always looking at some sort of security deposit. Again, some of these are similar to what you find in residential. So operating expense coverage is kind of a big one. This is where the triple nets come in. So a lot of times, people may not realize and we'll talk about, lease types, but if it's not a full service lease, if it's what we call a triple net lease, the tenant is actually responsible for a base rent amount plus the operating expenses. Their pro rata share, depending on what percentage of the property their particular space, suite or whatever it takes up, they're responsible for that share of those operating expenses. And the operating expenses can be pretty wide as well. So we've got typically property taxes, property insurance, your common area maintenance expenses. All of that is actually rolled into what we call the triple nets. So again, you'll have your base rental amount plus all of these extras. And the interesting thing with the triple nets is that, each year it can vary. And obviously, like with everything else, expenses keep going up. So typically those triple nets go up every single year. So you kind of have to look at that when you're looking at a lease, either for yourself or, advising a client. They need to be aware of what all of those longer term expenses might be. So sometimes, we'll see leases where there might be caps on operating expenses. Don't see it too often. You probably see it more with some of the bigger retail anchor type tenants. So there's that. The use clause, which really is going to be very specific as to what actually can occur in that space. So it might be very limited to just a hair salon, or if it's a bar restaurant, it might be limited to certain, maybe you can serve beer and wine, maybe not hard alcohol. Some of those are permitting issues, has more to do with the city, but sometimes landlords, because of conflicts with other businesses in a retail center, especially, might have restrictions on those use clauses. Maintenance repairs, we kind of talked about, and this sort of falls under the triple nets again. But again, be aware as a tenant or advising a tenant on a commercial lease, know what is being covered by the landlord and what is the responsibility of a tenant. Modifications and improvements also is written up into the lease. So if there's any alterations that need to be done to the space, who's paying for it? If the landlord is paying for it, is it going to be recouped in additions to rent over a period of time? Usually it's kind of a balance. They look for tenant to have some responsibility in covering some of the tenant improvements, and landlord will cover some of those as well. Another big item is sublease, any kind of an assignment clause for a commercial lease. This is important to know, because in some cases, if if things just don't work out with a particular business, or that business needs actually a larger space and they're locked into a lease, do they have the ability to go out and sublease it, right? So we just had a recent example where our client actually had that scenario. They were actually purchased their own building to move their business, but they're still tied to their lease. And we've been helping them with trying to secure a sublease tenant for them, so they can actually get out of that lease in some respects, right? So
Yeah. So it's interesting when you look at a residential lease, it might run you about 5-6 pages. How long is a commercial lease, Rich?
I think the longest one I've seen was probably 60 some pages. I mean, yeah, they can be pretty crazy. And there's usually a lot of addendums, right? I mean, there's just a lot of extra things that end up in a lease. One of the things too, which this is, another component of a lease, is the personal guarantee, which is a whole nother section or addendum to a lease. And again, something to be aware of. A lot of people don't know that there is personal guarantees tied to a lot of these leases. So that is the recourse that the landlord has if there's a failure to pay rent or some sort of an issue. The landlord actually has the ability to go after personal assets of whoever signed the personal guarantee. Tenants don't like them, right? Landlords love them, but I mean, that's their security. Tenants don't like to sign personal guarantees. It's in most cases pretty difficult to get around them. We have had a few examples. We were able to negotiate a no personal guarantee lease. Usually it requires a substantial deposit. And again, obviously that's there designed to sort of cover or protect the landlord in the case of a failure to pay rent. So
Absolutely, and therein lies the trepidation why many people don't lease and they don't start businesses. Is they're just there? That's a very tenuous thing, right? When your personal assets are on the line. I remember I owned a company back in 2009, a pretty large real estate company. We were leasing a space, and after 3 years, the landlord released us from the personal guarantee because we showed proof that we could make the payments. But a lot of people basically are concerned about starting a business. It's just too much risk for them, and so that is a very important component. There's a few different acronyms. Rich, could you give a brief definition of what they mean? Because if you come from residential real estate, or if you're just a consumer, these don't make a lot of sense at times. When I hear the word triple net, if you could just talk about that one more time, and then cap rate. What is a cap rate? And then also NOI, right? These are terms you hear quite a bit in the commercial side. Can you describe those? And then I want to go over some of the different lease types.
yeah, so the triple net is so the first thing you mentioned about triple net that falls under leases. The other two components, cap rate and net OI is more for a purchase, particularly with investment properties where we look at that. Triple net though, when you see triple net in a lease, the reason it's triple net is NNN, net, net, net. And the three nets are property taxes, property insurance, and the third net is like all of the common area maintenance items. So common area maintenance items are going to include really all of the other kind of operating expenses for the property, landscaping expense, resurfacing a parking lot, just normal sort of cleaning of the space, the common area spaces, things like that. So the triple nets can vary pretty widely. You tend to see on newer properties where there's a lot more amenities. You might have a large landscape area, waterfalls and fountains and all kinds of fancy stuff in a new property. Well, those are expensive, and those costs to maintain all get passed through to the individual tenants based on their pro rata share of the building.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then the cap rate. What does that mean when you hear that term?
Yeah, so I'll start with net operating income because that's a component of the cap rate. So net operating income on an investment property is really just all of the revenue that is generated by the property. Most of that obviously coming in the form of taking in rents minus the all of the expenses to operate the property. So you take all of your income minus all of your expenses, you're left with net operating income. That net operating income component, if you divide that by a potential purchase price or the actual purchase price once you've negotiated that gives you a rate. That rate is what we call a cap rate, and the cap rate is just a simple way to compare different investment properties. So when we're working with a client and they're looking at, 3 or 4 different properties, we're going to lay out all of those numbers and we're going to say, here's the cap rate of this one, here's why, here's the cap rate of this one, here's why. And then that investor client has the ability to compare those different properties. Obviously, as an investor purchasing a property like that, you want the highest cap rate possible. If you're on the other side representing a seller, which we've done as well, on the seller side, you want a lower cap rate. Lower cap rate means the selling price is going to be higher. So you're kind of always looking for that balance in there. And those rates right now, is a factor of interest rates and things too that play into it. But for the most part, cap rates right now are in the fives, maybe 6, 7+%, depending on the property. And again, that's going to vary quite a bit. You're going to have a very low cap rate in something like a McDonald's location, right? Because very, very unlikely that there's going to be a problem or a default. So some of the larger corporate type tenants are going to have, those properties are going to carry lower cap rates. Something that's more risky, a value add type property in maybe an area that's a bit run down, needs a lot of work. Maybe there's, 50% vacancy in a particular property. That's going to command a much higher cap rate because it's a riskier investment for a client. So they're going to be they want to be compensated at a higher rate.
Yep. Excellent. Makes good sense. Let's shift gears into all the different types of commercial leases. As if you're a residential agent, you should know kind of an idea of why these are the way they are, and you can see opportunities all the time. And also, if you're a tenant or a landlord, there's different ways you can structure a lease. So, Rich, let's kind of walk down, maybe give us a high level of each of these different types of commercial leases out there.
Yeah. So three kind of main types of leases. One we've already talked quite a bit about. That's the triple net lease. Most commonly, you're finding triple net leases in retail properties for sure. We have seen them in industrial or flex industrial properties, have seen them in office properties as well. Again, triple net leases are going to have a base rate plus a percentage of all of those extra expenses as well. So that's what we call triple net. And there are different types. I mean, there's a single net, there's a double net, there's triple net. So the difference there is really like what is being covered. Sometimes the property taxes are being covered by the landlord or the property owner. So then it's a net lease. That all makes sense, right? Um, the other extreme to that is what we call a gross lease or a full service lease. And under a gross or full service lease, typically all expenses are included in that number. The nice thing about a full service lease is you know what you're getting. You know what you're locked into. You don't have to wonder if next year when rates go up or expenses go up, or is your rent now going to go up because the property operating expenses have gone up. So gross leases are favored, I think, for tenants for the most part. Again, all of those expenses are still built in. It doesn't necessarily change the number so much, but at least you know what you're in for. You don't have to worry about a huge escalation in operating expenses year over year. And those we tend to see mostly in office, very, very common in office leases. In fact, a lot of those might even include utilities as well.
Yeah, in fact, if you think about it, like if you're a tenant and you're in a pretty decent sized building, you've got four air handlers on the roof and you're under, 5,000 square feet, you're looking at like 10 to 15 grand if you're in a triple net lease and something goes wrong with these air conditioners, like catastrophic failure or, something, one of them goes out. Not only does it disrupt your operations, but you're into that for a lot of money. So if you're a tenant, a gross lease would be preferable, right? And with some of those big expenses, because those can hit you hard.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think most people are going to run across triple net leases unless you're doing office, tends to be where we'll see full service type leases. Kind of one of the other categories is what we call a modified lease. And probably the easiest explanation of a modified lease is it's kind of somewhere in between a gross lease or full service lease and a triple net. So modified, and the reason they call it modified is because it just has varying components, and those really, when we see modified leases, we literally have to call the leasing agent and say, hey, well, what is all included in this number so we know what to report to our client. The last thing I'll touch on, which you don't see too often, but what we call a percentage lease is actually where the landlord will take a percentage of the sales of a particular business over a certain amount. And these are much more common in things like retail properties. Sometimes your larger anchor tenants might have some form of a percentage lease. We have run across it. This last deal we were kind of just talking about, it actually included a percentage lease, and we were able to negotiate that away. I mean, it didn't really make a lot of sense for the client anyway. But again, and these are just things that as agents representing you or representing your clients, that we these are all things that we have to look for, right? And all things that we're trying to negotiate on behalf of our client, which in a lot of cases, clients themselves, especially if it's a new business just starting up, they have no idea. This is all new to them. So these are all things that we're very well aware of and doing our best to negotiate as much as we can on our client.
And if you're just joining us, we have Rich Galster here. I'm Jeff Sutherlin. We do residential and commercial, and we specialize in the United States, actually in Arizona specifically, but all over the United States. So we can co-broke with agents around the country with deals, especially in the commercial space. And also, if you drop your information in the chat, we can get to you those different types of leases. That's our free tool for you. We can get that out to you as our gift to you, just some education on the different types of leases. And when you sit down with us, we'll negotiate for you on the best type of lease that would benefit you and do our very best to, set up a situation that works for you and your circumstance. So this has been great, Rich. So we've touched on the types of leases, some of the differences between the residential and commercial side. and basically what commercial leases are. Why would it benefit somebody to lease commercially versus buy? Could you give us a little bit of the pros and cons about both of those scenarios?
Yeah, I think primarily it's going to be finances. In most cases, you'll find that, especially if it's a newer small business, right? They're probably not going to be able to go out and buy a $3 million building to put their business in, or a $3 million condo to put their business in. So I think for the most part, it comes down to the money, how successful the business is, and what they have. Can they purchase a property, which obviously might be ideal for them, or are they going to have to lease?
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, friends, Rich has an accreditation called a CCIM. That's a pretty high level designation in commercial. I would say it's pretty equivalent to being a broker on the residential side. I'm a broker on the residential side. I have my broker's license. Rich has a CCIM. So Rich, what's that and how does that benefit our clients?
Yeah, the CCIM designation is kind of the highest you can achieve in commercial real estate. It took me a number of years to get there, and it uh, is a component of studying modules. A lot of detail goes into the numbers, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of terminology, but it just gives you a well-rounded base of knowledge in commercial real estate, really touching all the different areas we've kind of already talked about. So I think the other thing too that I'm finding with the CCAM designation, it's a lot easier. I find that my level of return phone calls and the people I can reach out and connect with, it's just a whole nother pool of agents that I have at my disposal. So the CCIM member network is pretty tight, and made up of a lot of really good professional men and women. So it's just another source that we can tap into on behalf of our clients.
Yep. So if you're a consumer anywhere in the United States and you're looking to either purchase commercial real estate, sell it, lease it, or be the tenant, reach out to us because we can actually connect with different commercial agents all across the country, and we can vet them for you and actually make sure that we set you up with the right people. So we are full service across the United States. We specialize in Arizona, but in the commercial space, we've got that kind of reach. So we happen to belong to a very large and successful brokerage, EXP Commercial. Rich is a part of that brokerage. I'm on EXP Residential side, but we cross pollinate and we help each other. And so if you're somebody in Arizona, I'm the boots in the ground. I'm the client facing person, a lot of the marketing, and Rich does a lot of the data analysis, the contract work. So together we're a pretty amazing team. So if you have a need, just reach out to us. We'll give you free information. We're here to help you. Any last word, Rich, before we say goodbye to everybody?
Yeah, I think just speaking more to other agents out there, residential agents, that you have an opportunity that you're probably not capitalizing on right now, and that is being able to offer commercial services to your clients. We get a lot of referrals from residential agents, and the common theme is, hey, I have a client I've been working with. I sold them a house, and they they have this business and they're looking for a bigger space to lease, and is that something you can help with? So absolutely, you just have to kind of listen for what your clients are saying, and if you run across something that sounds like it could be a commercial lead, feel free to reach out. I mean, we're happy to kind of vet that. uh, you know no deal is too large or too small. Just let us take a look at it and see if we can help. And it's just another way to grow business, grow revenue on your business. And if it's just straight up referral, we take over and you know get the deal done, and you get a check, right? So it's a win-win.
You can't beat it, Rich. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope this was helpful. Go ahead and hit us up if you want any more information. It's been real. On behalf of Rich and myself, have an awesome, awesome day.
Thanks, Jeff.